special member of our Emory and Henry family and the wider community. His name is Dr. Jerry Jones. Dr. Jones was born in 1947 in Southwest Virginia in Glade Spring. He attended public schools in the era of segregation. He holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Virginia State University and a doctoral degree from Virginia Tech. Starting his teaching career as a high school teacher in Baltimore in 1969, he became a professor at J. Sargent Reynolds Community College in Richmond in 1974. In 2001, Dr. Jones returned to the Glade Spring home where he grew up, and that has been in his family since 1870 to take care of his elderly mother and to work at Emory and Henry. And you may have taken some computer literacy courses from Dr. Jones, and he's teaching right now. And so you might be familiar seeing him on campus or in his classes. And Dr. Jones is also known for his wonderful music. He's a very accomplished musician. He's played music for nearly 60 years, and he has played piano at numerous area churches, events at Emory and Henry, and events sponsored by Abingdon's Highland Festival. He specializes in gospel and other church music. And Dr. Jones's book was actually published in 2011. It's titled Go and Come Again, Segregation, Tolerance, and Reflection, a four-generation African-American educational struggle. And it was actually recently republished by a new publisher in 2020 in November. And in December 2020, the book was included in the New York Times Sunday book review. So that's a wonderful thing to see that his work has gotten out wider than just our community area. That's phenomenal. With nearly 60 years in education, both as a student and as a teacher, Dr. Jones provides a unique perspective about society, education, and minority status in America, the past and the present. And we're looking very forward to hearing what Dr. Jones has to share with us tonight, his experiences, his wisdom, his wonderful sense of humor. And so with that, I will turn it over now and welcome Dr. Jerry Jones.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you for helping me to put on the record that the book is not so new after all. It's new from the current publisher, but as I was just saying before we went on live, the old publisher went out of business. They didn't tell me they were going out of business, they just died. I called them last fall to get some more books for a course that I was teaching, and I got that recording that said, this phone number is no longer in service. That's not a good sign. So sure enough, they went out of business, took my money and ran with it, I guess you might. Well, so much for Go and Come Again. You may wonder why I named it that. One reason was it reminds me of what we sometimes do with computers when the computer just won't do. There are 3 buttons that you can sort of depress together: Control, Alt, and Delete. Some of our students would know that. And it kind of starts it to reboot again, to begin over again. And that sort of describes some of the things that I've been through in my very long teaching career. It's also something that my mom used to say. She was a very involved church person. And perhaps I shouldn't be saying this, but I'll say it anyway. Once in a while, we would get a preacher that wasn't quite doing what she thought he should do. They were all men back there, Reverend Bowers. You know how that was. And so she would say something like, he needs to go and come again. So a lot of things that your parents say when you're young, you become old yourself and you find yourself saying some of the same things that they used to say in your presence. And then the last part of Go and Come Again is my own personal journey. I left this area in 1965 to go off to college in another part of the state. And having grown up in this area during segregation, there were a number of things that we could not do, places we could not go, and schools that we could not enroll in. When I came back officially in 2001, 20 years ago, a lot of those can't do's were could do's. So that was like me going and coming again. When I got back in 2001, as Maggie said, my main focus was my mom. She had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She was in her upper 80s, was living here in this house by herself. We had some caregivers to come in occasionally, but some of them were not very reliable. I never forget, I called one day and said, let me speak to whatever the caregiver's name was. Let's just say the name was Susie. I said, well, let me speak to Susie. Mom said, well, she's not here. And I thought Mom was confused because confusion goes with Alzheimer's. Come to find out, she wasn't there. She had decided to leave town with her boyfriend and get married, and somewhere living, I don't know where, like say Texas, and didn't bother to tell us that she was leaving. So obviously, I realized before 2001, even though my brother and his wife were living in Bristol, that's still a bit distant from here. So I said, I need to get back home. And so I retired from my Richmond job that I had been at for 27 years and moved back home. The job for Emory and Henry, I knew that the job was going to be mine before my moving back, and there's a story there. And but just to give you an idea about the topic of the book, I need to tell you that when I first came to Emory in the fall of 2001, I thought it was important to let people know that even though I was coming here from Richmond, that I was a good old, that I had grown up in Glade Spring, that I was living in the house where I was born, the same house where my mom was born, and the same house where my grandmother was born. I thought that would sort of make it easier for people to get to know. You know how it is when you meet people for the first time. I was the new kid on the block. There weren't very many new hires in the fall of 2001. I may have been the only one, to be honest with you. And I was hired at a less than full-time status. I think the term was or is adjunct, even though I was teaching like 9 credit hours and so forth. But anyway, I would introduce myself and I'd say, I'm Jerry Jones. That was before the Dallas Cowboy Jerry Jones uh, over my claim to fame and so forth. And I would say, I'm from Glade Spring and whatnot. I didn't go into details. I didn't talk about the fact that my mom was uh, diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I didn't go into the fact that my one and only brother died the day that I moved back. All I said was, I'm from Glade Spring and I'm back here to teach at Emory. And so as time went on, people would, we would set up conversations and whatnot. And the following question occurred more than a few times. Oh, you grew up in Glade Spring. So that means you went to Patrick Henry. And for those of you who don't know, Patrick Henry is a high school just down the street from Emory. It's a high school that was a brand new school in 1960. It is a high school that serves Glade Spring and the immediate how shall we say, the Glade Spring metro area. Can I get an amen for Glade Spring? But I would pause and say, well, if I tell the truth, that might be a little bit much when you're just meeting somebody. You don't want heavy topics when you are just introducing yourself. Hello, my name is Jerry Jones, and I grew up in segregation. That just does not work. But eventually, people started to realize that given my age, given the nature of this area back in the 1950s and even into the early 60s, that yes, segregation was what I grew up under or with, or however you want to say it. So what did that mean? That meant that we were not allowed to attend, even though it was close by. The high school that I went to was in Bristol, Virginia. The building is still there. It was named Douglas High School, Douglas with two S's on the end. It signifies it was named after Frederick Douglass, the African American uh, stalwart of prior century, abolitionist, I think is a term to describe what he was doing, trying to get rid of slavery. So were there problems with going to Douglas High School? The biggest problem was how far it was from Glade Spring and all the other places in Washington County where Black kids live. We had been going to Douglas High School since 1948. For 1948, there was a very small high school, Black high school in Abingdon. Um, it didn't last very long. I had an aunt who went to that high school. And by the way, you need to know that before that high school in Abingdon, Black kids of Washington County, the county, their education stopped at the 7th grade. They had an elementary school to go to, grades 1 through 7. And when you got to the 7th grade, that was it. It didn't matter that the parents were paying taxes to this county. There was no high school. And that's not just Glade Spring. There was no high school in much of Southwest Virginia in the early part of the 20th century. So what did some people do? They left Southwest Virginia and they went somewhere they could at least get a high school education. There used to be a college down in Tennessee in a town called Morristown. Maybe some of you who are listening to me right now know where Morristown, Tennessee is. Back in the 1800s, a 2-year college was founded in Morristown. What did they call the college? Morristown College. And yes, you could get a 2-year college degree. It's like a community college is today, 2-year associate's degree. But what you could also get would be high school education that you may not have been able to get back in your hometown. So Black people from all parts descended onto Mars and other colleges like that to get either high school training, college training, or both. My grandparents actually met on the Morristown campus. So it was around for a long time. My mom went there, as did some of her siblings. Uh, in my generation, we had a high school close by. As I said before, it was Douglas High School in Bristol. Well, what about elementary school? Glade Spring had an elementary school for Blacks. The school that I went to was built in 1922, and it was paid for not by local funds, but it was paid for by a grant from a foundation that was run by the president then of Sears and Roebuck. It was called the Rosenwald Foundation, and they paid for this school. to be built. That's where my mom went. It's my mom's dad, my grandfather, spring barber. He had a little independence when it came to income because he cut the hair of black men and white men, mostly white actually. He had his barber shop in the town square of Glade Spring, and he cut hair from 1902 until he passed away in 1933. The reason I'm telling you that is because he had enough money to send some of his kids off to Morristown. Some people couldn't do it because it cost money to go to school then, just like it does now. Maybe not as much, but it still costs, and they didn't have as much money as maybe some of us do today. My mom actually went to school for high school a few years in Cincinnati, Ohio. You might say, well, how on earth? You mean to tell me she moved all the way to Ohio just to get more high school education? The answer is yes. Why Cincinnati? Because her brother lived there at the time. She stayed with him. And I have a picture in the book of her standing with her other classmates in a night school in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1932 and 33. So that gives you an idea about the lack of education for Blacks in this region. I don't want to dwell on it too much, other than to tell you, for those of you who have come to Emory from other areas, perhaps one of the first things you notice when you get here is that minority presence is very slim. Well, is it anyone know why it's slim? If you had to leave this area just to finish your high school education, why would you come back? My mom came back. For all of her siblings, she's the only one that actually came back and raised her two children in the house where she was born. Her siblings went to other places. Brother that went to Cincinnati. There was the sister who went to DC. There was a brother who went to New Jersey. And by the way, he became a medical doctor. Was also a Tuskegee Airman, if some of you know what that was all about. So they all went on with their lives in other places. And in a way, I'm thankful that my mom came back here because I'm sort of glad that I was raised in a small town as opposed to the big city. Always a skinny boy, skinny guy, skinny kid, and I can just imagine how I would have dealt with the sometimes rough streets of some cities. Most roughness I had in Glade Spring was making sure the train didn't get me as it was coming past my house many times a day. By the way, the trains in my early days, mostly passenger trains, very few freight trains like we have now. Trains would stop at Glade Spring. They would stop at Emory and Henry too, although I don't remember that they had quit stopping at Emory when I came along. But once upon a time, people came to college by passenger train from wherever they were. So what else can I tell you about growing up in Glade Spring? Well, I need to tell you that my mom became a divorced lady in the late 40s. Well, that means that there was my mom, my brother, and me. And times were, how can I say this politely, kind of hard for a while. House was old. The house was cold. We sometimes wore more clothes to bed than we wore during the day, but we survived. There was a brief time when we were on welfare, but we survived. We didn't have indoor plumbing, if some of you know what that is a euphemism for. In other words, our bathroom was outside, if you know what I mean. We had electricity, but we didn't have a lot of electrical appliances. We had a radio, but no television. He said, no television? How did you survive? Well, in 1952, it didn't matter if you did have a television. In this area, there were no television stations. First television station to come to this area was 1953. We still didn't have one because we couldn't afford it. But my brother finished high school and went off to join the Air Force. One of the first things he did was to send money so that mom could buy a TV, so that when he came home on leave or furlough, at least he would have something to do other than watch the trains go by. Did a lot of back in that day. The fact that he was in the Air Force kind of improved our finances a little bit. I can remember a time when my mom was paid as little as 35, 45, and 50 cents an hour. I sit down nowadays and listen to the news. Wage might be raised to help me out, somebody, 50, $15, whatnot. I said, I don't think they had a minimum wage back in our day. The ladies that worked in the various homes of rich white folks in Glade Spring, they just took what they could get and dealt with it, you know. I never felt like we were poor because everybody on my street, we were all in the same level. Some of you will be shocked to know that my street was very integrated in the 1950s. I had as many uh, white neighbors and friends as I did black, side by side. We played together. We visited each other's homes. My mom would stand like for hours and talk to neighbors across the fence and whatnot. I don't know what they were talking about. That's a ladies' thing, you know. We men, we didn't say too much. We just kind of grunted a little bit. But anyway, it was a fine time. You say a fine time when you had to go outside to the door? Yeah, because that's all we knew. That's all we knew. Something else we had back then, we had buses. A lot of the black folks would get on a bus in Glade Spring, ride to Emory to work in the homes of people who were professors at the college. Oh, the names of a lot of professors long before I understood what college was really all about. So I finished high school in 1965. I'm skipping around here now. I'm not used to doing it like continuously talking about myself. By the way, talking about myself is something new for me. This is something that I used to hesitate doing. I would much rather play a song on the piano than talk about my life growing up in Glade Spring. But the book changed all of it. So I've been doing it off and on now for 10 years. Am I getting used to it? Well, a little bit, but not much. So anyway, I went off to college in 1965, but before I tell you about my college experience, let me tell you about where I almost went. I almost went to Emory and Henry, and I'll tell you why. In the summer of 1964, Emory and Henry decided to have a summer institute high school kids. And what I didn't know at the time is they had a bigger, they decided that they were going to invite one or two black kids to come to that summer institute, stay on campus, and be taught the latest things in mathematics. Why was that a big deal? Because before this particular year, 1964, the presence of African Americans on the Emory and Henry campus was very slim. They worked in the cafeteria mostly, worked on the grounds mostly. One or two people studied here, but quote, day students only. No blacks stayed in the dormitories, to my knowledge, before 1964. So I guess the young lady from Bristol, Tennessee, and me from the Bristol, Virginia High School, I guess we were kind of integration pioneers, if you will. There's a picture in the book of me standing with the group here on campus, our campus, I'm in Glade Spring, in the summer of '64. What I didn't know was that they kind of had a master plan. Some of the Emory officials came to my house and talked with my mom and me about me enrolling after I finished my senior year, which would have been fall of, let's see, when did I finish high school? I finished in '65. So they wanted me to come to Emory in the fall of '65. I knew Emory was a good school, but I was hesitant to come. And the reason why is because I would have probably been a pioneer. I would have been like a very select group of maybe two, three, four, or maybe five blacks at the most on the campus in the fall of '65. Someone had already warned me that your freshman year is a very challenging year. Have any first year students listening to me now? I would love to hear your feeling about your first year in college. How's it been, y'all? Well, anyway, I felt like if I knew that my freshman year, just out of design, is going to be difficult, do I really want to add to the extra, I won't say burden, but the extra stress of going through 12 years of all Black education, grades 1 to 12, and all of a sudden being in an all white environment with maybe two, three, four, or five Blacks? The first Black students to come to Emory full time, one of them was a classmate of mine from the Douglas School in Bristol. She stayed 1 year. She was a very smart young lady. Stayed 1 year. I still know of her. She lives in Bristol now. Eventually, she got her college degree from Virginia. What's the school that closed? Virginia Innermont in Bristol. Some of you who are from the Bristol area may know of that college, which no longer exists. My mom let me make the decision myself. So I decided, since I had all Black grades 1 through 12, I'll go to a Black college. It was in Petersburg, still is, called Virginia State College then. Now it's Virginia State University in Petersburg, which is in the Richmond metro area. I'm glad I made the choice. Nowadays, that college is referred to as HBCU. We didn't have a lot of abbreviations back then. We just called it Virginia State. BCU is historically Black. When I went, it was all Black. But I'm happy to say I had my first white teachers in college. Never had a one between grades 1 through 12. Someone may be speaking to me right now who could say, conversely, a white person who might be able to say, I never had a Black teacher until fill in the blank. I would love to hear your responses sometimes about that. By the way, I'm speaking to students now. If some of you return next year, and if I'm still around and you had a class from me and it was remote and I never got to meet you, at least stop and say hello. Miss that. And even if I see you, I wouldn't know you because everybody's got the mask on. Now that my mask is off and you are staring at me, at least you halfway know what I look like. So say hello. Come by Glade Spring and you go to the one and only grocery store in Glade Spring, You will pass the back of my house and you might see me out more in the yard. If you think it's me, wave, and I'll wave back, whether I know you're not. Now, back to the episode of going to Virginia State. And I'm going to wrap this up in a little bit because I'm not going to talk about the big growth. I need to talk to you a little bit about going to Virginia State. As I said before, I think it was a great decision to make, not that I am putting down Emory and Henry, but for me in 1965, going to Virginia State was the right choice. I had uncles and whatnot who thought I made the wrong choice. They thought it was cool to be a pioneer, but they weren't going to be in the classroom. They weren't going to be on the campus. They weren't going to be mistreated if that were to occur. By the way, when I was on the campus in 1964, there was a rumor floating around because I was staying in Hillman Hall, uh, maybe the first Black person to do so. There was a rumor floating around that I was being mistreated. One day I was summoned into Wiley Hall to see the dean, and he said that it is going around on campus that you are being mistreated in the dorm. And it was like, what you talking about, man? I didn't say that because we weren't that familiar back in the 60s. In retrospect, if it happened, maybe I was too naive to know it happened. But I think you can imagine that anybody is a first time, whatever, that there are going to be issues to deal with. So did Jerry have any issues when he got to the all Black college in Petersburg? Well, yes. The fact that I was from the country, the fact that I had a Southern accent, I'm not sure I know what that means, because when I got to Virginia State, I heard some accents that I'd never heard before. Uh, they didn't say the word about the same way. But the point that I'm trying to make, even people in your same ethnicity or in your same persuasion or in whatever characteristic you have, somebody is going to find an issue with that. It didn't last with me but a semester or so. By then, I figured out how I could get the upper hand on everybody. I could type. A lot of guys in the dormitory couldn't type, and so I would type papers and charge them appropriately. Or I could have get an amen for that. So I guess what I'm saying to all of you that I can't see is, if someone is causing you a hard time, you are not the first. My mom was sort of looked down upon because she was a divorced lady. You can always find some reason or something to look down on somebody else with. And I think we need to get over that. One of the interviewers asked me, and I've been interviewed since the book sort of kind of took off, and I've been interviewed on TV and on the radio station twice and in the newspaper 2 or 3 times. People have asked me a lot of questions. Let me share with you just a few questions that have been asked before. Maybe some of you have this on your mind now. Question number one is there something in your book that was very funny that you put in there and have been thinking about it? Yes, let me tell you a brief story about that. We rode the bus to Bristol to high school for 5 years. Um, it took us almost an hour and a half to get there because there was no interstate in those early years. We had to make a lot of stops along the way. By the time the bus got to my house, all the front seats were full and the heater was up front where the driver was. So I ended up having to sit in the back. And in the wintertime, the back seats in the bus, it was very cold back there. And so when I would get to the school, sometimes my feet would be so cold I couldn't walk. And my mom found out about it, and she was not going to have her boy with cold feet. So what did she do? She got a brick, put a brick on the stove, let the brick get hot, wrap the brick in aluminum foil and cloth, put the brick and the cloth and everything in a paper bag. I carried the paper bag onto the bus, put my feet on the brick, and my feet were just fine. I'm getting to the funny part. Hang on. So 30 years go by, have a reunion. This fine looking young lady comes to me and says, "Oh, I remember you from Douglas. I remember you." I thought she was going to say something like, "You were so cute." No, it wasn't that. I thought she was going to say, "You were so smart." No, it wasn't that. "You used to carry bricks." That's all she remembered was me. That was a funny thing. Someone else asked me once, "How did you feel when you came to Emory the first time as a professor in the fall of 2001? I felt I felt like I was coming home. I know that sounds weird because I was never really a part of Emory except that that brief time I stayed there in the summertime. I felt like I fit. I felt more like it was a calling rather than just another job. And the reason I feel like that is because I learned sort of after the fact that the main course that I was teaching, they had just written that course description like the year before I got there. So I guess what I'm saying is it like meant to be or something like that, and can't put it into words. It changed my life in this respect. In Richmond, my life was separated. Music was not a part of the community college that I was. I had to play for a wedding one time and I couldn't find a piano anywhere in the school to practice the wedding music. But when I came to Emory, everything just kind of fell together. I never expected to be at Emory, but just a few years. After all, they put visitor in front of my title. I was a visiting professor, and here 20 years later, I'm still visiting. So I guess it was meant to be. And one more thing before I stop. I remember that first year, I went to the chapel, and as a part-time person, I didn't have to go to the events and whatnot, but somehow I felt like I should go to the chapel, and it was some event for the first year students. And all of a sudden, the choir got up singing, "The Lord bless you and keep you." And I started getting so much for my masculine persona there. It took me back to that song being something that we used to sing at the high school in Bristol. I hadn't heard it like in 20 years. And here it is being sung on the campus of the college that I am now going to be working with. By the way, if you want to know a little trivia about Emory and Henry, I'm talking to the students now. I challenge you to find the answers to some of these questions, and this is how I'm going to wrap this thing up. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Black or white Emory person, so you need to know this. You don't know the name of the African American who briefly served as president of Emory and Henry, you need to find that out. Question number two, you need to know what African American was a professor briefly at Emory and Henry, and this professor, was a one-time speechwriter for. You need to know, question number 3, you need to know what African American has served as a faculty member of Emory and Henry for the longest time. You need to know, is it true or false that Emory and Henry used to be, once upon a time, for males only? You need to know, if you don't already, what decade did the presence of African Americans take off as far as being members of the faculty? In other words, if you are not from this area, you need to know trivia about this area, not just you need to visit. If you ever have time, you need to visit some of these little towns. Yeah, Glade Spring doesn't have a lot going on. But if you have some time, go to Saltpole. It has a lot of history, far back as the Civil War. You need to know what happened at Emory and Henry during the Civil War. All kinds of little tidbits of information. And if any of you who are listening to me right now were in my core 100, I would guess you know already because we talked about it. All right, I've talked enough, so let me cut this off and let the powers that be see if there are questions there while I put something in my mouth because it powers that be.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. There are no questions so far in the chat or in the question box, but feel free to go ahead and type those out. I will ask my panel if there are any questions from our panelists.
Everybody's in a state of shock. Take your time now.
Okay, so there's 2 questions that have come through. The first one asks if you were a member of a fraternity at Virginia State.
I was not. Well, I was named honors fraternity, but not an official.
And the second question says, wait, what? A Black president of Emory and Henry? So you might want to elaborate on that a little. Dr. Jones, if you're talking, we couldn't hear you there.
Oh, I'm not talking.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
A follow-up to the fraternity question, which honors fraternity or was it a society?
It was a honor society for my major, which was business education.
Why do you think that that it has taken ENH so long to hire African Americans as faculty?
Part of it is the area in which we are right now. And it's really no one's fault who's alive today. I mean, so much of this area is the result of what happened in the last century, the 20th century. And there have been other minorities who have been here. I remember a young man, I forget his nationality, he was not African American, but from a distance, some local people could not tell what his nationality was. And he and I would talk often, and he would say that sometimes people would look at him and his family strangely as they made their way about the area. So that's part of it. The other part, I guess, is because Emory is small, liberal arts, that makes it, you know, you have to sort of be at the top of your uh, profession in order to apply here when it comes to some of the majors that we have. And if a young Black person, let's say, has a PhD in mathematics or biology or whatnot, they would, and had a choice between Emory and major state-supported university in a metro area, you probably can guess which one they are going to choose. So there are a lot of reasons why it's not easy to do. My situation was different. I was an old guy when I got here. I had nothing pretty much to prove. I had already been teaching more than 30 years. Plus, I was living at home. I was living in a house that had no mortgage and a house that I was used to. So I mean, it was made to fit my situation totally. So here I am.
Another question asks, how do we get more African Americans to this area and to Emory and Henry?
I wished I could tell you. I would love to have more. Not only would it be good for him, but it would be good for all of us who have been here forever. Case in point, there's this little church that I have been trying to save in Glade Spring, and you say, save, what's he talking about? The numbers have dwindled so low that it is just a matter of time, probably, before it will be closed by the Methodists. And the reason is because, well, the Black population is so slim, I mean, 1% of the residents of this county. By the way, I did some research and found out that the African American population in this county, way back when this house was built in the late 1800s, it was close to 20%, and now 1%. So does that tell you something about what has happened over the years? But to get more specific about the question, what can be done to bring more minorities, especially African Americans, to this area? It could happen without us having to do a lot. Let me explain. I have done some research that says a lot of, not a lot, but a certain number of people are fed up with urban living. Some people are even fed up with living in California. I don't know what that's all about, but that's what I've heard. And I guess what I'm saying is, if people are living in the North and the West, where are they going to go? And if you have any friends who live in places and are thinking about the crime in the cities, the gangs in the cities, the cost of living in some cities, the tolled roads in some cities, even in some parts of Virginia. And say what you want about Interstate 81 that drives me crazy with all the traffic going and coming, but at least there's one thing: you don't have to pay toll yet. Ride it. So that may help. It may also help if they finally get the Amtrak that's somehow coming right now, as far as, help me out, is it in? So if they can get it to swing on down this way, I think some people will probably swing along with it and might be inclined to stay.
All right, I'm going to read this question as it was written. It seems like you have reached a point in your life where you have taken all of these experiences to mold you into who you are now. And I must say, it seems like you have a beautiful soul, and it seems like you are not mad or hold a grudge because of these struggles that you've faced. I have interviewed many people in the past, and I have found a few who have fed from their unique experiences for good and for growth. How do you do this? What's the secret to not hold grudges against a society that was not fair to some of its citizens like yourself?
Excellent, excellent question. It's ironically a question that been asked a number of times before. And here's how I tend to explain it. And I think I mentioned a little bit of it in the book. When I was a kid back in the early 50s, before we had the television, all we had was radio, there were very ingenious things that my mom would bring to us for entertainment. I mean, you can listen but so much on the radio. We used to have something called jigsaw puzzles, which she would get these puzzles out on the table. Basically, what it was, there was a picture of like a scene or something like a mountain or a beach or some type of picture, but it was cut up into all these little pieces, and you had to put these pieces together. And then we would get these pieces, and we would be excited. By the way, when people would come to visit back in the early 50s, instead of stopping in the living room, they would come into the dining room at the table and sit there and try to get the puzzle together. When we got very close to getting the puzzle all the way together, there would be a few parts, few pieces that looked like they just wouldn't fit at all. My mom would say, I think the people made a mistake when they made this puzzle. They cut this piece and it don't belong anywhere, the way she would say it. But eventually, you tilt it this way and you turn it around, and sure enough, it would fit. What's the point that I'm trying to make? All of those things that happened to me and others down years, if someone had asked me that question back then, well, obviously, if I were only 10 years old, I wouldn't have understood the question, you know. But the point is, when things happen that aren't quite toward our liking, just give some time. Thank the Lord that I have lived thus far 73 years. And I can look back on my 1950 experiences, my 1960 experiences, and whatnot. If you're religious as I am, you can say that God had a plan for me. Yes, I went through some rough times, but it, like you say, it makes me the person that I am today. If my life had been very calm, very collect, nothing went wrong, everything was cool, then it would not have made me the person I am today. Now, those of you who've met me, you probably, some of you may know me better than others, you know what my personality is. It didn't happen overnight. One more point. Resentment does not do any good towards the persons who cause that resentment. It only damages the person who holds it in. I don't have time to be upset. I don't have time to be upset with the fact that I didn't get to go to Patrick Henry High School. I don't have time to be upset that I grew up without knowing my father. I don't have time to be upset that my music ability reaches a plateau because I can't read music. I don't have time to be upset that most of my immediate family is deceased. If I spent time thinking about, oh, woe is me, I couldn't get out. My baggage would be so heavy that you don't want your negative impulses to weigh more than you do. And in my case, that would not be very much because I don't weigh a lot. Does that, oh, but you read that, so the person is probably, but that's my answer.
Thank you very much for that answer. We also have a question from President Wells. Thank you so much for sharing these rich life experiences with us this evening. How might Emory and Henry uncover and celebrate more such stories so that we can tell a more nuanced and inclusive view of our region and college?
Need to do is what we're doing right now. We need to do more of it, and it doesn't necessarily have to involve me. Anybody that has the will to do that. I need to tell you that historically speaking, me doing something like this is so removed from, if anyone in the audience knew me 30 years ago, and I don't think there's anybody that, oh, he's the new kid on the block. Public speaking, especially to groups that I don't really haven't known that long, that was just not something I did. You say, "What? But you're a professor." Yeah, I know. I can talk about bits and bytes and back in the old days, the punch cards and all these other things. I can talk about computers left and right. I can talk about business things because two of my majors were business, because most colleges didn't have a degree in computer. Oh, right. You say, well, why didn't you get your degree in computer programming? Well, tell me what colleges had programming in 1960? Not a lot of them. But anyway, I'm getting off the subject. Anybody has a story to tell. I like people to know that me doing what I'm doing now, talking to all of you like I am, I'm not so much talking about me, I'm talking about people for whom I am a representative. And some of them I don't even know. You'd be surprised how many people are still alive today who went through segregation in this area and other areas. I'm always meeting somebody. I met a gentleman just the other day who wanted to buy a book of mine, white gentleman. He came to the house. Right. And he and I were talking on the porch about how things used to be, because he and I remembered. And I sort of shared with him the story that I just told about this coming together and making sense. What you need to do is to not talk down to people, just talk. One more point. A lot of people expect change in this country to be top down. I'm starting to preach and I can't help it because I'm a lady, you know. In other words, if we get so-and-so in office, they will fix all this racial mess that we're going through. I beg to disagree with that. I think the change needs to come from the bottom up. So what does that mean? It means on a daily basis that you need to sort of talk with people that you don't normally talk to. When I came to Emory, I didn't expect to be like the guy that knew about racial stuff, because I was the computer guy. Things are exclusive, I guess. So that would be my response to that. Figure out something. Go to a black church. If you can find one that hasn't been shut down, come to mine before it closes. Especially if it's a time when, after COVID, and we can start singing again. Could have get amen for that. Because a lot of those gospel songs that have been a part of my life for almost 60 years, may not be able to tell you where in the Bible this passage is, but I know what the song tells me about that passage. And I used to be able to read those left and right. A long day, so probably can't remember them now, but you know what I'm talking about. One of the songs is We've Come This Far by Faith. How else could somebody from Glade Spring be a teacher for 50 plus years if it wasn't by the guidance, supreme guidance of God? Another song that we used to sing was, if you ever needed the Lord before, you certainly need him now. Amen. What else did we sing? Oh, here's one. Buy flowers while I'm living. In other words, if you see something that you like that a person has done, even if it's not somebody you know, tell them about it. Oh, you sure look nice today. Oh, you sure solved that problem quickly. Don't wait till they're gone and say, oh, he sure was a fine man. And I think that's very appropriate now because of COVID and we've lost so many people. I'm often wondering how many of people, those people who passed away, knew how much they were appreciated, especially those that may have died, in weeks or a few number. There's a song for everything that we go through in life. Someone told me, now shut up after I say this. I didn't know that the title of my book is mentioned somewhere in the Bible. I have any Bible scholars out there, but there's something in the Bible that when you leave this Zoom thing tonight, type in something like, go and come again in the Bible and see what comes up. I didn't know that when I wrote the book. Lady here in Glade is an elder of one of the Black churches in Glade, and she told me back in 2011. So anybody else?
There's just two comments that I'd like to read. These are not questions, just comments.
Okay.
The first one says, as a mother with a disability, I have endured many tribulations. My history as a healthcare professional of 14 years or a United States Navy veteran does not soften the blow. I do not have a question, but I do have a statement. My 12-year-old son is watching. Your life story is very empowering, so thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
And then our good friend Bucky Boone also said, if your piano is nearby, he wants some music.
I wished I could do that. It's downstairs. Yeah. I quickly tell you about my piano. 4 years. I never thought I would switch to digital. It's electronic. And piano tuners were becoming harder and harder to get. And when you got them, they would have to come at a certain time when I couldn't. So I made the transition in, I think, January of 2016. I went to Kingsport and I bought a digital baby grand. And it has changed my attitude about piano playing. I used to not play a lot because I felt like there were other things that I need to prioritize higher than just play the piano. But now, if the mood strikes me, I'll go. All I have to do is push a button and it does all these extra things. Since I'm here, I don't have anybody close by except the fire department. So I can turn it up and do my thing. It looks like a baby grand, but it's not quite as cumbersome as a baby grand would be, because even though my house is big, it's full of a lot of junk. Some of you wouldn't know about having junk in your house, but I have a good reason. Some of my junk is 150 years old, so I can't get rid of it. My mother and my great grandfather need to keep that junk, right? I have a clock in my house that was given to my grandmother by my grandfather on the occasion of my mother's birth. When was my mom born? 1911. Guess what, y'all? The clock is, it doesn't look so good, but it's still ticking. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Maggie Oberman put a link to Dr. Jones's book in the chat, and it also is available at the Merck as well on campus. So check that out. And thank you for joining us.